Perikid Zayin, Mishnah Yud Aleph. And we're carrying on with the Mishnayos dealing with Shiurim. Says the Mishnah, V'yesh Omru. We've had many Shiurim mentioned in the previous Mishnayos. We're dealing with Kazayas and Beitza and Amos, and now we're saying V'yesh Omru b'midah daka. As we know, the system of measurements, measurements for volume, Beitza, Kav, and Sa'or, etc., there were actually three such systems. The original system was the one Moshe Rabbeinu used in the Midbar, called Midah Midboris. Then there was a time when they shifted over and they expanded the Midas, and they went from Midboris to Yerushalmis. What they did was they took all the Midas and they expanded them by a sixth. So whatever was a hin or a sa'or or a loig last time, this time the new loig was bigger by a sixth. And then they expanded it again in the time of the Gemara, that became called midat tzipoiris. So you always have got to be very careful when you're dealing with measurements to know exactly which midah you're dealing with. This is the Mishnah. There are some measurements which, even though they changed them to Yerushalmis and tzipoiris, they still kept the old midah midboris, the one they used in Moshe Rabbeinu's time, the original ones. That's called midah daka because that was the smallest of the midas. A loig midbori was less than a loig Yerushalmi and a loig tzipoiri. It says the Mishnah, midas halach v'hayavish. The midas used in the Beis Hamikdash for liquids and for dry stuff. In other words, the hin and the chatzi hin and the yavish used the loig, etc. They still kept those in the old midah midboris, the small midah. Shuron be'italki, zu midboris. The midah italki, there was a country in those days called Italia Shel Yovon. I'm not quite sure what that is. And that was the same midah as the midah midboris, the one Moshe Rabbeinu used. All other midahs they changed and expanded to tziporis and Yerushalmis. Now the Mishnah is carrying on. V'yesh omru hakoy lefi mashu odom. There are some midahs that the shear for this particular din is not a fixed shear like we have for a kazayas. They actually differ according to the person that is using the shear. In other words, they're measured by that person's body, and they change according to the size of that particular, of the user's body. What are, for examples, depends on the size of the person that actually wants to use the shear. Hakoymet samincha. This is in Beis Hamikdash when a kohen does committed to the mincha, takes his hand and he does committed to the mincha, and it's a shear of maloi kumtzoi. But of course, people's hands have different sizes. Therefore, by definition, the kohenets depended. Therefore, the size of the kohenets depended on the size of the kohen that was doing the kmitza. Similarly, the ketoris was done. Both hands were put. This is the one in Kippur, and in Kippur, the kohen gadol, apart from the regular ketoris he did every single day, but on the ones he took into the kodesh kodshim, how much did he take? He put both hands, called the maloi chafnaim, and that of course depended on how big the kohen gadol's hands were. Similarly, the shear for shtir on Yom Kippur to make a person chayav kares is the size to fill up a cheek full, and it's the same size used for drinking as we know for kiddush, and that of course depends on the size of the person. And the last one is actually the one where we get into a little bit of a complication. We're talking about Eruv Techumeni, the shear, how much food you put out at the end of the Tchum to allow you to walk another 2,000 amas. That depends on Mozen Shtei Su'udos. And in the Mishnah, we're now going to have four views on this, but it seems from the Gemara and Eruv and Daf Lamed that actually these four views mentioned, they're actually split into two sets of two. The first two, you can see in the Mishnah, is Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. They're actually arguing about a chayla and a zaken, people who cannot eat normal meals. Because for them, regular people, the shear is going to be fixed at the end of the Mishnah. So in people who cannot eat regular meals, they have a shear which actually depends on their particular circumstances and the size of their body, how much they can eat. Says the Mishnah. Everybody agrees that the shear is Mozen Shtei Su'udos. So how much is that? It's measured by the person himself. This person is Chayla and is Zokin. How much can he eat? What are two Su'udos for him? Remeir says, however, these two sudas are measured by his weekday sudas, not his Shabbos sudas. Rabbi Huda Omer l'Shabbos avol lo l'chol. You measure it by his Shabbos sudas, not by his weekday sudas. Elu ve'elu miskaven and l'hakal. Each one is actually ending up with the smaller of the sudas. Why? Remeir holds that one eats less in the week than one does on Shabbos. Shabbos, the food always tastes nice, and therefore you eat less during the week, and therefore it's 2 weekday sudas. Rabbi Huda holds that the sudas on Shabbos are actually smaller than the weekday sudas, because on Shabbos you have to eat 3 sudas, and the weekday only 2, and therefore the Shabbos sudas are a bit smaller. In other words, both are trying to be makel on the man, on the chayr and the zaken, that the shtei sudas are measured by his 2 of his smaller meals. All they're arguing about are those smaller meals done on Shabbos or on the chayr, but that's the shear for a chayr and a zaken. And the second part of the Mishnah, we have a machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, that these are actually fixed shiurim for Erev Techumin. They're actually not part of the list of the Mishnah, where the Mishnah said, V'yesh amru hakoy lefi mashu adam, but because we had a machlokas in Erev Techumin for a zaken and a chayla, between Rameh and Rabbi Huda, about mazayna l'chayla, mazayna l'shabbos, and that does depend on that person, how much he can eat. There's no fixed share for that. So we're finishing off the machlokas by telling us the other shurim for Erev Techumin, although they actually are not lefi mashu adam, they're actually fixed. So these are the halachas for the regular Erev Techumin, for regular people, that apply today. And there's a machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, what constitutes shtei sudas. Says Rabbi Shimon. Now, I'm going to make it as simple, because some people get a little bit phased and fuzzy when it comes to all this mathematics, so I'm going to make it simple. Says Rabbi Shimon, the shear for shtei sudas is mishtei yodos lekikar, misholosh lekav. That means 2/3 of a loaf of bread, misholosh lekav, when there's 3 such loaves of bread in a kav. In English, each loaf is therefore 1/3 of a kav, which is 3/9 of a kav. 2/3 of that, 2/3 of such a loaf, means the loaf is 2/9 of a kav. In other words, all Rabbi Shimon is saying is that shtei sudos is 2/9 of a kav. Now, a kav is 24 beitzim. 2/9 of 24 beitzim is 5 1/3 beitzim. There you have it. That's Rabbi Shimon's shear. Now, in other places in Shas, Rabbi Shimon actually says shtei sudas is not 5 1/3 beitzim. He says it's actually 8 beitzim, which is true. But in Erev Techumin, there he's makel. Although normally for shiurim which are d'oraisa, the shear for shtei sudas is 8 beitzim, yet Rabbi Shimon says on Erev Techumin we can be makel, and the shear is 2/3 of 8 beitzim, which is actually 5 1/3 beitzim, which is what we just said, 2/9 of a kav. That's Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, he says the shear is a little bit different. How much is the shear for 2 sudas? And this is his shear for 2 sudas, Eruv or not Eruv. It's always, this is his shear for 2 sudas. He says, Mikikabe pundion. Pundion is a coin, a small coin. The size of a loaf of bread, small piece of bread, that you can buy for a pundion. When me'arba soin besela, when the price of wheat is 4 soin, which is a volume, for a seller. Again, let's make this as easy as possible. We've got 2 coins mentioned in this Mishnah, a pundion and a seller. All you have to know is that a pundion is 1/48 of a seller. Okay? So therefore is how much bread you could buy for a pundion. And a pundion is 1/48 of a seller. The price of wheat is 4 so'in to a seller. Okay? Now 4 so'in is 24 kav. Therefore, the amount of wheat that you can buy for a pundion, the pundion being 1/48 of a seller, the amount of wheat that you can buy therefore is half a kav. So in other words, all this Mishnah is telling you, it's the amount of bread made up by half a kav of wheat. However, bread with half a kav. However, when the baker buys wheat at this price and then hopes this and then does all the work of making the bread and ending up with a little bulkala, he's not going to sell it. He's not going to sell that half a kav for a pindin because then he won't make any profit. So the Gemara assumes that he'll always make a 50% markup on the original wholesale price of the wheat, and therefore what Rabbi Yochanan is saying is, this is his way of saying a quarter of a kav. That's all he's saying, a quarter of a kav, which is 6 beitzim, as opposed to Rabbi Shimon, who holds 2 sudas is 5, 2 sudas for Erev Techumen anyway is 5 1/3 beitzim. He says 6 beitzim, and all the actual mathematics you can see in more detail in the Bar Tanura. And then we're going to move on to